Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special episode since we'll be, first of all, doing it in English because we have a very special guest. We have Joseph Burns, who is joining us. And he has Joseph, I think one of the first things that I want to do is just tell the audience a bit about your background. You have a very impressive background. You've been in Meta, you've been head of product at Rappi. So tell us a bit about that and how you've transitioned into the entrepreneurship role and founded Lupa Hire.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thanks for having me here. And I'm glad we're doing this in English instead of Spanish. I've been practicing all week and nervous about having to give a podcast in Spanish. I was on a radio show in Spanish once in Bogota and I bombed. So I'm really happy that this time I can speak in English.
Awesome.
But yeah, a little bit about my background. Thing that most people don't know about me is I'm from a small coal mining, steel mining village in Ohio, and I always wanted to get out. The population is 3,000 here.
Mm.
And my urge was just to see the world and get out, and spent a lot of time in Europe, trying to play professional basketball. And then eventually that dream went away. My ankles and knees were not in agreement. I'm pretty tall. You can't see it on the camera. But I used to play some ball back in the day. And
Cool.
yeah, first real job, I would say, I was working in sales, making cold calls. Oddly enough, they told us we had to make 80 calls a day. I would make 200 and work 16 hours a day. I got pretty good at it, but I realized I can't just, sell my whole life. I'm more technical and I wanted to do something else. Next job was in engineering. And I worked as a data engineer, data wrangler, building models for credit cards or different credit programs at Capital One. I was always jealous of the product manager. I thought they had the coolest job. And I wanted to be a product manager. At a place like Capital One, you have to climb a certain ladder to get there. And I'm impatient. I don't like to wait. And I ended up getting a job in product at Facebook. And that was, Daniel, that was when I thought I made it. I thought that I
Yeah.
was at the top of the mountain. And after a while being there, I looked around and was like, are you guys enjoying this? Because I'm not really enjoying this very much. It's one of those things you aspire to get somewhere and then you get there and you're like, well, maybe this is what I wanted. And that's when I got a phone call from a company called Rappi that I had never heard of before. I had to look it up. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I didn't know what it was. And for me, I think the most interesting thing was their sort of cowboy attitude towards growth and the way they approach things, talking to all the people that work there. I was on video interviews with them. I could see the chaos in the background. And I thought, this is where I want to be. I want to be somewhere that is aggressive and fast moving and interesting. And everyone thought I was crazy because I took an 80% pay cut to move to a country that I had never been before. And I spoke Portuguese at the time, but not Spanish. So I knew I had to learn a language very quickly when I arrived there. But honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. And in Rappi, as a product lead, it was fairly easy to know what we needed to build, but the how we were going to build it was a different story, right? Rappi is very complex. You have billions of products, millions of stores, 9 different countries, 3 different languages. It's a hard problem to solve, and it's a very, very deep logistical problem across the board, whether it's the catalog or the deliveries, you name it. It's very complex and at scale. And we had worked with local recruiting companies. We had worked with our internal HR team, but we weren't moving at the speed that we needed, nor getting the quality of people that we needed through what was out there and what was available to me. And I remembered, in my first onboarding at Facebook, Chris Cox talked about how he took over hiring at Facebook as the CPO. And that stuck with me. And I got to a point where I went to Rappi's leadership and I said to them, I am taking this problem because it is the biggest, hairiest, ugliest problem that we have. If we don't have the very best people on our teams, if we don't have the very best engineers that we can find, and if we don't have an amazing way to attract them, not just evaluate them, but attract them, because good recruiting is half finding the right person, but half convincing that person to come to you. If we don't have these systems in place, we're not going to get to where we need to go, and we're not going to be able to build what we're looking to build. You got to remember, when I was at Rappi, the app would go down at lunch every day, and it would go down every Friday night because we were pulling everything together as fast as we could, and we were growing.
Yeah.
Happy problem. And so took over that, hired hundreds, I think almost 1,000 engineers in that time, and then eventually started to reach my hands into other areas of hiring across the board.
Mm.
From there, I actually started to get some phone calls from people that were leaving Rappi. They called them the Rappi Mafia, right? The people that were
Yeah.
at Rappi and became founders. We now have rebranded to be the Rappi Mahia. We like that a lot better than the Mafia. Um, and they started to call me and say, Joe, I need a founding engineering team. I need to build my initial recruiting team. I need to hire a CMO. And at first, I just did it for fun because I wanted to help my friends and I wanted them to be successful. But then they started referring me to people that I didn't know. And one day someone asked me what my rate was. And I said, well, I need to get back to you on that, right?
Mm.
So I went and found out what was a good rate to charge. And that was the first time that I made money in this sort of side hustle. Did that for about 6 months. Ended up hiring a couple people just on the side to help me, one of which is still with me to this day, before Lupa was even a company. And before I knew it, I was just having more fun, making more money outside of Rappi than inside of Rappi. And as much as I loved Rappi, I thought, okay, this is the time to do it. And, for me, the main thing that matters is, helping someone find a really good job feels great to me. You can really impact someone's life, and then also helping a company build a team.
Mm.
And, I'm lucky enough that I have a company that I can do both of those things, and, have put all the blood, sweat, and tears that I can into it over the last 3-4 years, and so far so good.
Este episodio es patrocinado por Fuse, el futuro de las finanzas impulsado con AI y Low Code. Si quieres hacer parte del mejor equipo de constructores digitales de la TAM, síguenos en Fuse Tech o en 5. Estamos contratando.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that last part, I took a bunch of notes from what you said. From that last part, I can uh, I can completely verify or validate what you're saying, since we've worked with Lupa at Fuse for several years now. And at one point, the quality and the level of consultancy that you guys were giving us, helping us improve our process, was so good that we decided to go and just have you guys recruit for us, and that was a very good time for us. So that is 100% true. I think that you put all of that knowledge behind Lupa, and we at Fuse, we can testify to that. And then going back to some of the notes that I took as you were kind of giving the intro, I think one of them that was pretty interesting is, and this is also a personal thing, but actually when I was starting my career, I also started in sales. I was actually an insurance agent. So I used to do a lot of cold calling, trying to get people and sell them insurance. And after trying that for a bit, I was like, yeah, that doesn't work. I went in more towards engineering. And then the last couple of roles that I've had have had that mix of product engineering. So I think that was pretty interesting how those transitions happen, maybe going from sales, engineering, PM. And then one question that I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned that at Facebook, at Meta, the chief product officer took over hiring. You kind of did the same at Rappi. Why do you think that works?
I think that one thing that product managers have in common is we have empathy and we have to understand our users, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're doing all day long, trying to understand our users, trying to identify with them. And I think as a product person and someone that used to be a technical person, you can empathize with the hardest people to find. We know that the golden talent out there is in product development, whether it be on the product side, design side, development side, whatever it might be. And I think if you have that sort of empathy and that is your core business, you can understand and pitch them in a way that's very different. And also you can understand who you want and what kind of skills they want to have. I find that it's really hard to hire for a role that you've never had before, or you've never led a team or never worked closely with a person before. And frankly, a lot of my customers, that's, not to be too salesy, but that's why they like to work with me, because they know I've been in the trenches and I understand, their particular problem set. So I just think that it's the empathy as a product manager, and it's the experience of working with these people and knowing what the challenges are and what's important to them, that allows you to connect with them and maybe do it a bit better. And then on the other side, we're all about efficiency, we're all about metrics, we're all about what is actually happening, and are we pushing three people through the funnel in the way we want, and are we getting that CSAT score that we're looking for. And I think when you combine that empathy with that analytical focus and that operational drive, you can make something great. across the board, whether it be, recruiting or building an ice cream shop, right? It doesn't really make a difference.
Interesting. And over the time that you've been building teams, especially at Rappi with the hyperscale and all, what are some of the things that you learn about building good product and engineering teams?
So I think the number one thing is that attitude will trump skill, but you still have to have the skill, right? It's that person that has the weird hobby that they like to go super deep on, right? It's that person that has been, what you guys say in Colombia, noña, their whole life,
Mm,
and likes to sit at the front of the class and likes to figure things out and likes to learn things. I think that is like one trait that will transfer no matter what. People that have that learning attitude and that open-mindedness, I think is just like the thing that stands out the most to me. And then, of course, on the technical side, I think that's much more objective, right? I think when people tend to be subjective in that manner and they're not really planned in terms of what they're asking, they're sort of winging it. I think that was like one thing that I learned is like we need to have a particular process for each particular role and make sure that we're going very deep to figure out what are the things that we're going to be asking, what are the things that we're going to be scoring people on, and making sure that that skill set part of it
mm,
is as objective as possible and as consistent as possible. And also you need to treat it like a product roadmap. You refine it, you edit it depending on the results that you're getting, but always be questioning whether you're doing the best interview process possible on a candidate attraction side, but also on a candidate evaluation side.
That's interesting that you mentioned the best interview possible. What do you think that looks like today? With the changes that we've had so far, what does that look like? Let's say for like a PM or a engineering role.
Well, I don't know if maybe the best interview possible is like a great target to start with, but I think like there are some certain things that you need to do that are just table stakes, right? I think number one is to make sure that your process is well defined and know that this person is going to cover this part, this person is going to cover this part, this person is going to cover this part. And when you stick to that, I think it works out a lot better for candidates. What are people trying to do whenever they're thinking about joining a job? Is they're trying to reduce uncertainty. And when you add uncertainty into a process, I think you create problems there. So I think that's step one is like, let's have a set process and let's stick to it, right? The next part, of course, is making sure that, you have a job description and you have an interview process that truly reflects as much as possible what the job is going to be like. And then I think the third part is always the cultural aspect. I think having a clearly defined notion of what is your culture, what are your non-negotiables, what do you want from people, what are you looking for them to project in terms of their energy that they bring towards projects or their way they see teamwork, and making sure that is not just cookie cutter but distinct to your actual organization.
Hmm.
So
Do
I
you,
would say like those are the things that you can knock out. Now, as far as an
okay.
exceptional process, I think like the one thing that I always advise people to do is like get your best salesperson on the first call, right? Your person that's going to get that person excited because, a good process has to be difficult. With Fuse, you guys do a great job because you have a difficult process, right? But you also have a process that is fluent and moves along and has like, a clear start and a clear finish. And I think the other thing is like, making sure that first face is friendly and knowing that half of this
Mm,
is actually selling the role, right? And there's a certain point where you're
right.
like, okay, I have a good feeling about this person. I need to turn the lights on because there are certain things, especially, a 2-hour coding test isn't always convenient, right? A
Mm,
take-home
yeah.
test that takes, 6 hours isn't always convenient. So if you're making sure those candidates are excited, you're going to avoid that negative selection bias that can come whenever you have a process that's a little bit too long. So you got to make sure that you're equally emphasizing the part of evaluation as you are like getting the candidates excited and making sure they're completing the process.
Okay. And you mentioned attitude. Do you see that like measuring or being able to evaluate the candidate's attitude? Is that in line with culture? Is it like, do you evaluate the attitude based on the culture, or is the attitude something different for you?
That's a tough question. I would say that there are certain cultures that are very distinct, right? Whenever I was at Rappi, you had to have, tough skin. you had to have thick skin. You had to be able to have certain things thrown at you and be able to handle it and be able to operate in that sort of environment, right? Now, there are other environments, like when I worked at Capital One, that is very formal and very structured. And if you don't have that structured approach to problem solving, you're going to get eaten alive in a decision forum and it'll never work out. So I think a lot of it depends on the phase of the business you're in. And I think it depends on like how scrappy you need to be in terms of the personalization of the culture. Other than that, I'm not really sure. I think like, there's obviously companies that are more mission driven that are looking for people that are much more mission driven. There's other companies that try to be mission driven, but how mission driven are you in a, I don't know, sorry to throw you under the bus on this one, in a payments platform, right? It's a different thing as if you're working for an NGO. So I think you just need to look at the individual fingerprint of your business and decide like what actually matters. And I think like the other part of like generalized things, it's like people that want to learn, right? People that want to learn are super, super useful because they're always going to be able to pick up on things. They're going to take feedback well. And, I always look for that person that likes to learn, that's reflective and can, give a response to something that they messed up and do it at an appropriate level, right? When someone says to me, you're applying for a VP role and you say, what's a mistake you made? Well, I sent an email to the wrong person. I'm like, well, that's not really an appropriate mistake, right? It should match your seniority. And I think like the ability to reflect on that mistake and own it and, point the finger at yourself rather than others, I think is a good indicator. But a lot of it is feel. I've done tens of thousands of interviews and it's really hard for me to pinpoint like how I go about it. But I think like there's certain themes that I'm looking for and certain themes that I've noticed over the years work out. And, my very tough job is to translate all of the information that I have in my brain in a format to my recruiters that they can pick up on it. Myself, I train every single one of my recruiters. That's particularly challenging sometimes to download your brain because your subconscious knows some things that your conscious doesn't. And then also you don't want to be biased either, right? So it's hard. Recruiting is tough.
You mentioned something that caught my attention, which is you talked about being, as a company, being mission driven so you can sell the role. And you mentioned that, if you're a payment platform or maybe just more in finance, it's a bit more difficult to get like something more inspiring. I think finance is usually seen more as, ambitious. You can kind of do a lot or make a lot of money, but what is the mission behind whatever you're doing? And I think something that has been very particular for us at Fuse is we've taken this approach of really having a big goal of replacing or being the operating system for finance in the US, but we've really focused on building the team with a lot of Latin American talent. And this gives us, and I think as I communicate to the people I talk to, so when I interview, I tell them about how we're changing the story of Latin America and how it's more than just the finance part. It's also about showing what we can do from Latin America. And I think that has helped us add more of that mission driven approach, and not just like, hey, okay, it's another fintech or something like that, where it's ambitious but there is no more substance. As you mentioned, like if you're in an NGO, you could probably sell it very well with connecting it to like emotion and stuff like that, whereas in finance it's a bit more harder. And with this, I actually wanted to go into the other topic and ask you a bit about Lupa. And are you focused mostly on hiring talent from Latin America, or are you open now to like talent everywhere?
Yeah. So, one thing I just wanted to acknowledge is like, I love that your team has something to prove, right? I think that is another mission that you can have. It's like you get to play with other A players. We have something to prove because we can open
Yeah.
up the door for the next, group of great companies that come out of LATAM. So I love that, right? So myself, our focus in terms of client acquisition is 100% on LATAM talent, right? And that's something that I think will change over time, obviously. But first things first, I want to get really good at this part. Now, what has happened is I have a lot of long-standing, customer relationships, and what we do a little bit differently is we try and just put a lot more care into everything that we do. So we write a detailed assessment for every candidate. If there's an interview happening, we show up and we make sure that everyone's on time. If our client's late, we'll sit there and talk to our candidate. If our candidate's having an issue, we'll call them, make sure they show up. We really get to know our candidates. We really get to know our clients. And I think that connection that we've been able to build with some of our clients has been the reason that they've said, well, why don't you find me developers in San Francisco? Why don't you find me a finance person in New York? And me, I'm a businessman, so I'm not afraid to go and try it. And we have had some success there, but it's not part of my marketing function right now, because I'm trying to win on certain keywords and certain areas and things like that. But it has grown from being 0% of my business to 10%, 15% certain months. And I'm not going to turn down a very good opportunity if I get one. But my main focus is hiring in Latin America. And just speaking to our mission, our mission is obviously to create more opportunity in Latin America. Now, do I do that as a headhunter? Not directly, but I think what happens is lots of companies will come to LATAM and they'll hire a team and it doesn't go very well. And they point at, the people in Colombia and say, oh, well, it's because the Colombians don't do this and they don't do that. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't do their hiring right. They didn't have someone to show them around. That's like, showing up in New York City and saying I have a bad time and I don't like New York City, but you didn't do any research and you didn't have anyone there to show you around, right? So what I find is that, with our customers, we try and make sure that we take care of everything, whether it's, finding the right people, connecting with the culture and tropicalizing their pitch, making sure that they're, doing all the legal things right, making sure they're not exposing themselves to risk, making sure that they know which companies or which countries they need to target, because Argentina and Mexico are completely different, the same way Italy and Germany are completely different, right? So what I try to do is make sure that we have a really hands-on experience with them that makes sure that they don't make any of the typical mistakes that people make when they hire in LATAM. And by doing that, what happens is companies that come to LATAM and they have a good experience, they keep hiring and they keep bringing more opportunities to the region, right? And those are great opportunities usually, because typically they'll pay a little bit better than the local rates, right?
Yeah.
And if they keep hiring in LATAM, more opportunities, more visibility, and I think that's where our mission comes in, just to make sure that our customers, when they do come to LATAM, they hire the right person, they have the right process, and they have a good experience, so they keep bringing opportunities to the region. And that's kind of how we connect our mission. Because for me, it's hard to say like, yeah, we're going to fill roles, that's our mission. Great, but for me, it's more about like, come to LATAM and have a great experience in building a team, and then you'll keep coming back and you'll tell your friends as well.
Those companies that do it, what's the difference between those companies that do it wrong and they hire that team, they blame the Argentinians, the Colombians, versus those companies that are doing it right?
So I think there's a couple typical mistakes that I see. I think the number one mistake is they go for the cheapest person they can find, right? I think when you go to Latin America, you have a good advantage that you can be slightly above the market rate. I don't think you should go and pay double. Everyone should be responsible. But I think whenever you're a US company or an international company like Fuse, you're the belle of the ball compared to a lot of local companies, right? Because it's very aspirational for people in LATAM to be able to get an international opportunity. They like to talk about it with their families, at their lunches, at their dinners, with their friends, whatever. So I think like you can be the belle of the ball. And, whereas if you're a small startup in the States, you can't compete with Google. You can get Google level talent in Brazil, right? And you can actually attract them if you come here. So I think like number one is don't go cheap, right? Pay what should be paid and go after the very best. Because I think, talent density is something that is just so important in organizations now, especially, with AI being able to do lots of things. And I think you guys do a great job of that at Fuse. So I think like that is probably the biggest, most common mistake right off the bat. Now, the second one, I think that people in LATAM, they want to be part of the culture of their company. They want to feel like they belong. They want to be involved in the mission and in the company's, key strategic points, right? So I think like when you treat them as the offshore team rather than the team, that's when you have a lot of problems too. And I think a lot of companies just go and they come and they say, okay, this is our offshore team for these projects that we don't care about, that we don't really, want to prioritize or whatever. I think that's a mistake. Like, I think if you're going to bring in a team that's international, you need to, look at people up and down the organization at all levels to bring in, not just junior people, and make sure that they feel part of your culture and part of your company's culture, and that they're valued. And I think like that is super important. Also, the last one, just a quick tip: if you're a gringo and you're hiring people from Latin America, say hi to them when you enter into meetings. One thing we do as
Hi, how
Americans,
are you?
we enter into meetings and we don't even say hi. We just get started, right?
Yeah.
Latin America, don't make that mistake. I made it too many times. My head of HR, he would tell me all the, Joey, you have to say hi to everyone when you enter the meeting, and you have to say goodbye. But it's like not really the culture that I grew up in. It's much more transactional, I think, in the US, where there's more of a family and culture element that is just deeply ingrained in society. So just don't forget to say hi and check in and see how everybody's doing. And you'll, it might take you 5 minutes, but I promise the return is there and it's worth it.
No, that's interesting. And on the other side, do you play a part right now when you're advising or consulting for US companies in kind of breaking, let's say, like a stereotype of there is like senior level talent in Latam?
Yeah. I think that, most of the customers that come to us are, fairly open-minded and aren't really, afraid to hire people in LATAM at mid-level or junior level roles. But I think that people are a little bit scared to make that investment in the senior roles. And usually it requires us showing them a couple good mid-level people, junior people that work for them for a while before they'll step up to that level. But honestly, I think the room for arbitrage is much higher with the senior roles, right? So, I'll look at positions that make $700,000, $800,000 a year in the US, and I'm like, you could get someone that is the best in class in their country for 150 or 200, right? But I think there is a little bit of hesitancy there. And I think there's certain roles that are suited for it and certain roles that aren't. So one role that I play with a lot of my clients, especially US clients, is let's look at all the people that work at your company. And let's look at your hiring plan going forward, and let's identify which organizations we think are suited for people that are near shore or in Latin America and which positions aren't. Like, for example, very high level sales positions, not really the best thing to hire in LATAM. But you can hire a great CTO in Latin America. You can hire an amazing, operations leader in Latin America. But I think it's a matter of like picking and choosing, because there are certain things that, require, cultural context that's domestic, right? But other things don't.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think now on to one of the topics that we really want to talk about nowadays, that the world is revolving around AI. How do you see hiring changing in this AI world? What's different? How are teams changing? I wanted to take some time here to note that you have a newsletter, right? I'm subscribed to your newsletter. It's the weekly shortlist.
Yeah.
And in the weekly shortlist, there is an article where you talk about that you should focus on what AI can't do in terms of your role. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So there are certain things that I think are very difficult for an AI to solve, that will remain that way, and certain things that are still that way, right? So certain things that will remain that way is, that very first interview, if you're looking to hire a very good person or a senior person or a very good professional, do not send them to an AI, please, right? What I think people do when they do that is they create a negative selection bias. And I don't just say that because I run a recruiting company. I say that because I've made that mistake. And, I tested it. I wanted to see what it was like. And I thought the experience was good enough to evaluate the candidates. But what we found is that the candidates that wanted to continue versus the candidates that wanted to continue when we had a human interviewing them were much better. And I think like one thing you can do is, there's maybe 3 really huge decisions that you make in life, which is like, how do you take care of your mental and physical health? Who do you marry or spend most of your time with in terms of your partner? And what job do you have, right? And that job decision is a very emotional decision. And I think when you leave an AI to be the face of your company, you can hurt yourself. Other things that I think is like, don't rely on it completely to write your job description. I think it's a good tool to write a good, fast job description, but I read a lot of job descriptions and I can always tell when they're written by AI, and they tend to not hit the mark. So make sure that you're editing it, making sure that you're having a good contribution from a human. One thing that I do with AI with job descriptions is I will sit in a call by myself for 10 minutes and just spit out everything I can about the role and have it organize it for me and then rewrite it. I think that's a good use. But I think like AI job descriptions are easily identifiable. We all can read AI for now and know when it is that. So there's like certain things that I think there. I think also like on the sourcing front, it's an indicator. I think it can give you a percentage score. It can give you a relative direction of whether someone has something or not. But then again, just be cautious of that, because you're biasing towards candidates that, just know how to game the keywords. And you might be missing out on someone that actually has the experience, but, maybe is so good that they don't really put as much effort into crafting their resume to match your exact keywords that you're looking for in your job description. So those are some of the ones that I caution people on. And I think like there's another side of it. So, Lupa, our original thesis and what I spent and a lot of money on was, we were going to build an AI recruiter. Myself, that's what I, raised my money on whenever I first started my company. And, the one thing was that, the candidates don't like it. But the other thing is when it comes to sourcing, that problem still hasn't really been greatly solved, because, if you're looking at tens of thousands of profiles or hundreds of thousands of profiles, it's very expensive for an AI to scan it. And, with the way that tokenization is now, it's still very difficult. I think that problem is like getting much more solvable. And I think I would have been better equipped to solve it 3 years later than I was 3 years ago. But I think like the sourcing aspect of it, it's just like, it's not so great for search. And I've played around with the AI sourcers, and I haven't found one that's better than me with a Boolean search, right? Or better than a senior recruiter with a Boolean search. Now I do use AI for lots of things, right? I think like the search strategy for a role that is, unfamiliar to us is very interesting to teach us things and learn about the requirements, helping brainstorm on questions that we should ask. Helping to create scorecards based on what the client is saying, helping us to record all of these conversations that we have with our clients so that we don't forget and miss key points is really important. Helping us to review the interviews that we have with our clients or with our candidates is very helpful for us to get a better understanding of exactly what's happening, because you don't really have time to sit around and watch too many interviews, but an AI can give you the key points. So for me, I think that sort of stuff is useful, but it's just a matter of like, use it with caution, and you need to have some substance behind it that really understands what's going on.
That's actually another point that you write on your newsletter, and that's AI as a tool and not a replacement. So I think you mentioned that you started thinking about that AI recruiter. How does that look now that you think that it's not going to be just fully AI for now, but it's more like a human in the loop and AI helping that human be more productive? Is that what you're looking at right now?
Yeah, so I think that the more senior and more crucial a position is, the less you will involve AI. I do think that for certain roles that have very high turnover or very high frequency, I do think there is a place for it. If you're looking to hire thousands of people for a call center or something like that, I think there's ways to inject that in the process that definitely makes sense for an operation. But I think like that's like one thing I look at as the spectrum of like, how senior and how important is this role? And it's the same thing whenever you're building something or doing something internally. If it's a quick customer service ticket, sure, we can have AI do it. But if your customer that spends $200,000 a month is calling you, you're not going to give them an AI response, right? So I think that's kind of how people are using it generally across the board, is like, if it's a not so important routine tasks, then we can use AI a little bit more. But if it's something hypercritical, we still want an expert looking at it with a human lens as well.
Interesting. And how do you think, beyond recruiting, how do you think AI is changing the roles, especially in engineering, where maybe before you would see a lot more emphasis on the technical side? And that's one of the things that AI is actually helping with more. And then that attitude, the culture, and the soft skills are kind of becoming more important as having people that are able to use AI to learn quickly, to be. We talked in an episode with some team members in Fuse about a concept being the expert generalist, which is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, maybe not too deep in one area, but has been around to know a lot about front and back end infrastructure. And now with AI, that person is able to be productive in the three areas where that wasn't the case before. What's your take, being or maybe seeing this across multiple companies in the market in
Well,
general?
I think first of all, like your take is very articulate and very on point, right? I think like that is, the key thing that we're seeing is that generalists are having a renaissance per se. Before there was an era where we wanted someone that knows React Native inside and out and can go super deep and solve the hardest problems that we have. We want someone
Mm.
that understands Golang and can, optimize and understands it at a super deep level. But nowadays, it's not really that important. And I think that the other thing is like people used to frown upon someone using AI for their technical test or for their take home test. But now it's like, you didn't use AI for this test? Like, what were you doing? Right. So I think it's just funny how things shift. And, every single role that I'm hiring right now, people are asking the question about how they use AI.
Mm.
And, how is this candidate using AI? What are they using it for? How do they apply it? How would you apply it to this situation? Um, and, it's super vital. Even my recruiters, I, train them on AI. I make sure that they're very literate in it. Um, Even though I don't want it doing all of the work, I do think it can do a lot of it. And, I don't need as many people as I used to. And I don't think most people that have a digital business do either. And that's an advantage, it's progress. And I think like what you can see is more companies coming out, more opportunities. Um, but it's funny. A lot of like the people in the tech world, we use it everywhere. But if you talk to an average person on the street,
Mm.
somebody that has a, what we call a normal job, they're not
Yeah.
really up to speed on it, and not really using it as much. So I think like in our world, it's king. Like I'm looking for people that want to get to solving a problem as fast as they can, and I'm looking for that for myself and for my clients. And you know, most of the time, the way to solve a lot of problems is through AI. I do it all the time.
Mm. And a bit of a controversial topic, but what do you think about product managers now? There's talk about not being as needed as before.
Yeah. Well, I think an underlying job of a product manager is a lot, getting people motivated and getting people excited. I think there's like a salesman quality to that. So I think like that part of it is obviously going to stick around. Like you have to have people excited. You have to, connect with your customers. You have to be empathetic. But as far as like coming up with ideas and that sort of thing, that's kind of what the product managers do. Crunching data as well. I think it's a lot easier. So maybe you don't need them, but maybe you need less of them. And
Mm.
definitely, if you're a product manager, you've got to go and understand all the tools that are out there for you. Take a class on, AI for product management, whatever it might be. I'm a little worried that if I ever have to get back into the job market as a product manager, there's going to be a lot of people that pass me up. I'm going to have to go study. Um, so yeah, it's something you have to be able to use in your role. Maybe you need less of them, and I think that job is just going to shift over time. The role of a product manager has changed a lot. You look 20 years ago, there weren't many companies that had them. Now everyone has them. Part of the reason that I, joined Rappi was because there wasn't a deep enough pool of product managers that were experts, right? That's one of those roles that isn't really like a defined role or a defined skill or thing or path. And I think it's just going to change a lot over time.
Mhm. Understood. And with there's one topic that I wanted to actually pick your brain on that I think you have a lot of experience being part of that hyper growth in Rappi. That is onboarding, because something that I found is that you can do the recruiting process very well and find really talented people, but if you don't have a good onboarding process within the company, even those great people are not going to be able to be productive. What are some, key things that you've found in your experience that really help people on board, especially when you're a company hiring 10, 20, hundreds of people? How can you share the context with those people that are coming in?
Yeah, so I think the first part of onboarding is pretty simple. I think a lot of people just sort of wing it, right? They get in there, okay, here's a few people that you need to meet. Here's a few meetings that you need to have. And I think that is like probably like the number one mistake. It's surprising how little they do. Here's one meeting with HR for an hour, right? I don't think that's enough, right? Here's a quick sync with your manager, or here's something like that. Like, what you should look at for each role is like, what is a sort of boot camp on the company look like, and have it very, very particular, right? So I think there are general things that apply to the company that you can explain. But I think like being very thoughtful about what exactly is going on. I think like don't leave it to a junior person, right? Have your more senior people taking care of onboarding. It's the most important thing that you can do. And I think, really make sure that you write it down, you document it, and, again, treat it like a product development lifecycle. Get feedback on it, adjust it, edit it. Onboarding is never done, right? It's just, the next iteration, the next iteration, the next iteration. And make sure you're getting feedback, and not just, hey, do you guys have any comments about the onboarding? And if you like it, because most of your new employees are just going to say they like it. But, where are they failing? What are the points where we're having to retrain them? What are the things that they're not picking up on? And how did we teach them that? Or did we teach them that? So I think it's just like looking at like that arc of the employee that you have, whether it be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days in, a year in, and then looking back at the onboarding and, trying to find some patterns and see if something connects, right? The secret is there's no secret. It's like keep digging and looking, and make sure you take the time to do it.
Okay, makes sense. And I think we're almost done. I wanted to ask you a couple of things now, a bit of tips for companies, but also for talent. I think for companies and for talent, what are good ideas in how can you differentiate yourself from other companies and from other people in the talent pool?
Yeah, so I think if you're a job applicant, I think that, nowadays, most jobs are open across the world, especially remote jobs, especially if you're in Latin America and you're listening to this right now. So you really need to stand out, right? I have lots of people that come to me that want advice on, how to get a job and things like that. I should start charging money for it, but it's just not a business segment that I want to go into. But I usually repeat the same advice, and it's, treat it like a sales process. Who is your ICP? What are the ways that you can get to them? How can you personalize your message? How can you reach out to them as many as possible? And I think in your job search as a candidate, the one thing to remember is that you can never be too aggressive in trying to get to talk to people, because at the end of the day, you only need one yes, right? And there's tons of companies out there. So make sure that you're putting yourself out there, and please don't just apply and wait for someone to respond, right? Go find the leaders in that company, go find the hiring managers, go find the people in HR, and reach out to them and try to actually have a real conversation with them. Just like when you're selling something, you're not necessarily going to start with, hey, you want to buy my stuff, right? It's more about getting to know the person, getting to understand their pain points, getting to understand, what it is that they're looking for in their company. And maybe you don't fit for them, but maybe you fit for someone that they know. But I think, be aggressive in terms of like finding out who you actually want to talk to and trying to just get to know them and talk to them, right? Most people
Makes
are
sense.
willing to help and want to help. So I think that's my main advice is like, don't be afraid and go after it, and sit down and take the time. When people are applying for a job and they spend, maybe 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, that's not enough. Getting a job is a full-time job, and you should treat it as such. And it's a very, very serious thing that will impact you greatly if you do it well, but also can impact you greatly if you don't do it very right.
Yeah, I agree. And I had a candidate not too long ago that wrote me on LinkedIn a very nice message. She was like, I want you to be my CTO. Started like that. And then, when you read that, I think one of the things that you say is, hey, people nowadays with AI, they can craft a message and then send it to 20 people. And I mean, that's in line with what you're saying about kind of going and being aggressive and getting to some people and just getting out there and talking to them. But I think one of the things that this person did really well was she put points about the episodes that we have in this podcast. She read about the company culture. She read about, like, it was rich in context. So it wasn't just like a this. It wasn't just a copy and paste message that you can send to 10 people and say, hey, let's see who replies to my message. It was like, hey, I really like that you guys talk about this value. I really like that you guys are looking to do this in Latam. I'm really aligned with this because X, Y, and Z. And that was, and we get a lot of applications. So 100, 200, 300 people apply, but it's very rare that somebody does
Yeah.
this level of reach out. And it's a big miss, I think, because people, if you really want to work somewhere, if you're really looking for a job, as you mentioned, if it's as important as you were saying, like one of the three most important decisions and things that you do in life, you should at least do what this person did and say, hey, I if I want to work somewhere, I'm going to do my research and I'm going to work in a place that motivates me and shares my values, and I'm going to tell them so that so I can be part of that team.
And this
And
this is definitely a person that's going to figure things out on their own too. They're a problem solver. They're not going to wait for the ball to come to them. They're going to go grab it and run it down the
yeah,
field, right? I love that. Did you hire her?
yeah,
How's she doing? Did she start yet?
starts in September. I'll let you know.
I can't wait to hear how it goes. I hope she does great. I think she will.
Entire process was a lot different. It was a more junior role, so there wasn't that much, like there wasn't that big of a risk. But throughout the process, she kind of accepted where she was at in level, and she was like, "I'm ready to grow, and I want to grow with you guys." So it was a pretty clear for us to give that opportunity and see how she evolves. But
My money's on her that she does well.
yeah, I agree. And but I had so that kind of sparked the question, and that is, how can companies, like, candidates should do this more, but I think companies should be more open to, like, making sure this happens. Like, what are things companies can do to say, hey, we want to hear from you in different ways, right? So that, because we get the other extreme where you go to the interview and you ask that person, it's like, okay, you're here in this interview, what do you know about views? It's like,
Mhm.
no, I don't know anything. It's like, so it's like, why are you applying for a job if you don't know absolutely anything about the company? And I've had even the other extreme, which is somebody coming in and saying, oh yeah, no, Fuse is great, and starts describing the company, and it's a completely different company. So that's like, okay, that research was really poorly done.
Yeah, I think well, I think as a company, like, it's hard because if you say that's what you want, then that's what everyone's going to do. So you're not going to be able to find those standout people. But the reality is we live in a TikTok universe where everybody wants everything fast, and those people that are willing to take the time, um, they're going to do a lot better. And hopefully they're listening to this podcast, right?
Yeah,
But it's tough because if
absolutely.
you go out and say that, it's going to be different. Somebody that I really like and a mentor of mine is Daniel Bilbao. And I think he does a really great job of telling the story of his company and what's going on and talking about his people. And I don't know if you've listened to the Truora podcast before, but it is incredible. I've listened to every episode multiple times. And I think, like, it's just such a good sales pitch for working there, even though that's not really what it is, right? So I think it's like the more you tell about your story, the more you tell about your values, the more people have an opportunity to get to know you, like with this podcast. I think the more they're going to come to you at the end of the day.
Okay, makes sense. Any additional tips for talent or companies?
Work with Luba. No, I think the main thing is, just remember that the people that you bring in is one of the most important decisions that you can make. Don't treat it as a sort of side project. Make it a very key initiative, and make sure that you're analyzing, every step of everything that you're doing.
Mm,
A great product is amazing, a great business model is amazing, but in order to have those things, you need to have great people. And I think sometimes people think of it as an afterthought, rather than something that's at top of mind. So I think that's one of my main tips. And I think the other part is, if you're unsure about a role or unsure about a region or unsure about how to do something, talk to an expert, talk to, a recruiter or someone that's done that role before, or someone that knows about it. Hiring for an organization for the first time or hiring a role that you're unfamiliar with, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So, don't be afraid to reach out to experts. And I think one thing that surprised me as an entrepreneur is that people really do want to help. And, so many people help me all the time. And I think, a lot of people don't really account for that as much. So if you're not sure, find somebody that can help you, whether they're getting paid for it or not. I think, don't go it alone if you're feeling unsure, right?
Hmm. And with the candidates, do you usually provide, also like, help them understand what they should be looking for, or like provide them with some sort of consultancy or coaching to get a good job?
Yeah. So with the candidates, I think what I try and do is balance it, right? Because I don't want to overcoach them, because if I overcoach them, then they're going to get a job that maybe they shouldn't get. And then my client's going to have a bad experience and they're not going to work with me anymore. Right.
Hmm.
So I think there's a balance of that. What I try and do is give them as much information as possible, about the company, about what they're looking at, reduce their uncertainty without giving them, the answers to the test. But I think, like, with the candidates, it's a balance, and it's a really hard one as a recruiter, because you don't want to cross that line, because it's going to catch you in the end. With candidates, what I would say is, simple things, look up the person's LinkedIn, read and see if they have a podcast or something about them, go learn about the company. And then the other part is, try and find other employees that aren't in your interview process that you can talk to. So you can really find out, if you actually want to work there or not. But I think the main thing with interview preparation is that any preparation is better than no preparation. Think of some practice questions, practice those answers. Too many people show up to interviews and wing it, but just make sure that you're practicing, and by practicing, you're going to do much better. Even if it's just the fact that you've done it once before, you can, feel a little more fluent the second time.
Hmm.
So for me, it's a tough one, right? And it's a moral one for me, because I don't want to overcoach candidates, because that will
Right,
backfire on me in the long run, right?
right.
But I do want to make sure that they're certain, so they know what the steps of the process is going to be. They know what to expect. And I think that'll create a better environment for them to have a more informed conversation with our clients. But yeah, it's a really delicate line to toe, and one that I'm usually very scared of, right?
Right. So, and I think now to conclude, we really want, and we've talked about this throughout. We really want Latam to show a different face to the world, a different story that we're telling now about talent, about so much talent in engineering, product, and operations. And you mentioned that if companies are interested in kind of diving into that Latam talent pool, they should talk to an expert. I think, of course, the expert here is Lupa. How can they reach you? What's a good way that they can get in touch with you if they want to talk to you and start hiring in Latam?
Yeah, of course. So myself, you can find me on LinkedIn. I respond to, every single person that reaches out to me. Joseph Burns, you can find me there. Also on my website, you can go directly to the book a consultation button and book a consultation with me. And I'll be happy to talk to you and help you out as much as I can. My goal in every call is just to figure out if I can help you or not. That's what matters to me most. If you're hiring in LATAM, I love it, whether it's with me or with someone else. And, I want to be there to support you, and I want to make sure you do it right so that you keep coming back. Because I think there's so much for the continent to offer. And, LATAM has given me so much. It changed my life. It's made my life so much better. I love living there. I love the people there. I can't, thank them enough. And, my way of giving back is to just try and make sure that when people come, they do it the right way so they keep coming back.
Awesome. Amazing. Joseph, thank you very much for your time here with us. And for everyone that's listening, um, this is a huge thing that we're doing right now, and is promoting and helping tell this different story of Latam. So, reach out, be a part of it, and let's move forward. Joseph, again, thank you very much. I'll talk to you again soon.
Cool. Honor to be here.